Hello, hello, hello. Uh, we are going to see the next chapter of Marxism, a next type of Marxism, which is Maoism. Maoism is also known as Chinese communism. Chinese communism. Maoism is also known as Chinese communism. Right? To understand Maoism, we'll have to understand first who was Mao and what was his time and space. Mao and his time and space we'll have to understand. Right? When we understand his time and space and understand him, we'll understand why he says the way he says it and why his ideas are there the way they are. So Mao was a chairman of Communist Party of China, CCP. He was chairman of CCP. In 1946, he became chairman of CCP, and before that, he was very much involved in functions of CCP. He was involved in the Great March, Great March during Civil War, during Chinese Civil War. So he has seen a lot of violence, and Mao is like all Orthodox Marxist. Mao is a man of action. Mao is a man of action who says that power flows through the barrel of a gun. He is man of violence. He's a man of action. This was Mao. Mao was chairman of CCP and a man of action. Right now, understanding his time and space, his sociology, is as important as explaining या फिर understanding his theory. Understanding his time and space will help you understand his theory. So Mao being Mao का जो sociology था, we'll understand his sociology first. Mao belonged to a peasant family. ठीक है. He belonged to a peasant family. जो social structure था चाइना का, social structure of China of that time was feudal, right? Mao belonged to peasant family, and social structure of China of that time was feudal. China का जो space था, the space of China of that time was post-colonial. That China post-colonial का मतलब है that China had just gotten independence, right? And one more thing that was there was the China, Chinese society as a whole was very much close to outside world, right? Chinese society was very much close to outside world, and जो चाइना का जो लोग है, they are mostly of one ethnicity which is Han करके एक ethnicity है वहाँ पे, and these Han people show extreme social solidarity, right? This was the background of Mao. His sociology was peasant, social structure was feudal, his space was post-colonial space. China had just gotten independence. Chinese society as a society was very closed, and the sociology which he belonged to, most Chinese belonged to of that time, even today, was Han Chinese, and these people have very much. They are very socially solid. They have very extreme social solidarity among them. So this is the background of Mao. Now let's end and He was ideologically Marxist, he was ideologically communist. Understanding his ideology and his social background help us understand why he wrote things he wrote and what his eventual goal was. The goal of Mao was to implement communism in China. ठीक है? In China. China of that time was all these things. China was feudal, China was post-colonial, China had social solidarity, China was uh, China was poor as well, right? He wanted to implement communism in a society which is not fully capitalistic as of. He wanted to implement communism in a society which is feudal, which is post-colonial. ठीक है? So this goes against the very ideas of Marx that that contradictions of capitalism will emerge, then revolution will happen. Mao tried to force a revolution in a society which was feudal and post-colonial. Right? Right? Implement communism in China. Implementing communism in China comes with three things. Right? If if your society is largely feudal, if exploitation in your society runs from feudal to peasant, your communism will be against feudalism, not capitalism. ठीक है? So Maoism is against feudalism, not capitalism, as exploitation that ran in that society was from feudal to peasant, from noble to peasant. If exploitation ran from feudal to peasant, so in revolution the central role will be of peasantry, right? And apart from this, apart from this was the first influence on Marx that he wanted to implement communism in China. So Marxism was the one influence on Marx. Another influence that Mao had, another influence that Mao had, apart from Marx, was Machiavelli. Machiavelli talks about hard power. Machiavelli talks about realism in politics, right? So Marx determines his goal. Marx determines his goal. Marx determines goal of Mao, that is to bring communism in China. Machiavelli determines his means. We'll understand his means, but let's just start with understanding influence of Marx on Mao and what things Mao changed in Marx ideas. ठीक है? ठीक है. Modification in ideas of Marx by Mao. जो पहला मॉडिफिकेशन था, it was communism in a feudal society, which is not against capitalism but against feudalism and imperialism. This was first modification in ideas of Marx by Mao. First, communism, he tried to bring in feudal society, and it was not against capitalism, but against feudalism and imperialism. The second modification that he does is in concept of dialectics, right? Dialectics for Marx क्या है? Dialectics, what is dialectic for Marx? That is dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism. What is dialectical materialism? Dialectics happens, change happens due to fight over resources. Right? That this is we have studied in Marx, whereby classes fight for resources and history moves ahead. ठीक है? Dialectical materialism. Dialectical का मतलब यहाँ पे क्या है? Fight. Right? In this concept, Mao changes a fundamental thing. ठीक है? For Marx, there are two classes, right? There are two classes, and these two classes have antagonistic relationship between them. Antagonistic relation. ठीक है? Whether it be master slave, whether it be noble serfs, whether it be capitalist and worker, the relation between classes will be antagonistic. According to Marx, Mao changes the concept of dialectics and suggests that there are two types of dialectics, and there are two types of relations. First is antagonistic relations, and second is non-antagonistic non-antagonistic relation. एंटागोनिस्टिक रिलेशन में क्या होगा? जो डिफरेंसेस है, द डिफरेंसेस बिटवीन क्लासेस आर अनरिजॉल्वेबल. ठीक है? चाइना की कंटेक्स्ट में एंटागोनिस्टिक रिलेशनशिप विल बी बिटवीन अदर क्लासेस एंड फ्यूडल क्लास के साथ द peasant and the worker class will have antagonistic relationship. यहाँ पे झगड़ा होगा और रिलेटिवली झगड़ा होगा. जो डिफरेंसेस है बिटवीन क्लासेस आर अनरिजॉल्वेबल, दे कैनॉट बी रिजॉल्व. और यहाँ पे देयर इज गोइंग टू बी फाइट फॉर रिसोर्सेस. ऑन द अदर हैंड he suggests there is non antagonistic relationship between classes as well. नॉन एंटागोनिस्टिक रिलेशनशिप मतलब जो डिफरेंस है, the differences between classes are resolvable. Fight is not inevitable. Differences are resolvable, and it is not necessary that there is going to be fight between these classes. That peasant should not fight with them. Who are these? These are indigenous bourgeoisie. लोकल जो कैपिटलिस्ट है, लोकल कैपिटलिस्ट के साथ है मार्क्स, माओ, नॉट मार्क्स, माओ, with local capitalist. He is only against feudals. He is not against local capitalists. He is not against indigenous bourgeoisie. Right? This is the concept of dialectics, which he says is of two types: antagonistic and non-antagonistic. Non-antagonistic relationship will be with indigenous bourgeoisie, indigenous bourgeoisie, and with indigenous bourgeoisie, the differences are resolvable. And on the other hand, there is going to be a non there's no going to be antagonistic relationship between feudals, and the differences unresolvable, and there is going to be a revolution against feudals, and there is going to be a fight against feudals. ठीक, ये जो नॉन एंटागोनिस्टिक रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन इंडिजिनस बुर्जुआजी एंड फ्यूडल एंड पीजेंट क्लास जो है, नॉट फ्यूडल, पीजेंट और वर्कर क्लास जो है, नॉन एंटागोनिस्टिक रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन indigenous bourgeoisie and worker and peasants. This is seen in Chinese political economy, Chinese political communism today, whereby you can see people like Deng Xiaoping, Deng Xiaoping, Deng Xiaoping, usually we call him DXP. DX opened Chinese economy way before Indian economy, which opened after LPG revolution. Chinese economy opened in 1980s, right? बट जो ओपनिंग का सीक्वेंस था, या फिर जो जो लेवल पे ओपनिंग किया, दैट वाज वेरी लिमिटेड, एंड पॉलिसीज ऑफ डेंग अलाउड इंडिजिनस बुर्जुआजी टू फ्लरिश. ठीक है, जो नॉन नॉन एंटागोनिस्टिक रिलेशनशिप है, दैट इज टुडे टुडे कैन बी सीन, that even today can be seen in policies of Chinese policymakers. We understood Deng, whereby Deng opened Chinese economy, and even today, Xi Xi Jinping Xi Jinping observes Chinese economy to be socialism with Chinese characteristics. सोशलिज्म है, बट चाइनीज जो इंडिजिनस बुर्जुआजी है, उनको ये सोशलिज्म में जगह है. when you understand people like when you see people like Alibaba, Alibaba site है, then there are big Chinese giants in manufacturing. There is Evergrande. These people are indigenous bourgeoisie China, and they are allowed to flourish, not outside bourgeoisie, not outside capitalist. This is Chinese communism, and this is the concept of dialectic given by Mao, whereby suggest that there are type relationship between classes. Workers, peasants will have antagonistic relationship between, unresolvable relationship between, non-compromisable relationship between feudal class. On the other hand, worker will have a relationship which is non-antagonistic, resolvable, compromisable with indigenous local bourgeoisie. And this non-antagonistic relationship we can see today China, whereby Deng opens Chinese economy, but opens Chinese economy only to indigenous bourgeoisie. Xi Jinping says that Chinese socialism is with Chinese characteristics. Chinese brand of socialism is socialism with Chinese characteristics. By Chinese characteristics, he means that there is place for indigenous bourgeoisie in China. This was the first idea of Mao. This was the first political idea of Mao, whereby he gives concept of dialectics. In dialectics, he suggests that there are two types of dialectics between classes. First type of dialectics is antagonistic, the other type is non-antagonistic. Antagonistic is between feudal class and non-antagonistic is between indigenous bourgeoisie. This was Mao's concept of dialectics. Now we'll understand his concept of revolution, and more specifically permanent revolution. We had question on permanent revolution in UPSC before. I guess there was a question in 2022. So we are going to see in much more detail.